Hi, my name is Vasily Tolstoy. I'm a member of the program committee of the Linux Peter 16 conference, at which we are now. And I'm talking with Michael Turquette.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to meet you too. Please tell us who you are, what you're doing, and where you're doing that.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm Michael Turquette. I'm the CEO of BayLibre. We're an embedded Linux consultancy working on all different types of Linux-powered products, a lot of Android and Yocto. Even though I have the CEO title, I'm still an engineer. I'm doing a lot of hands-on still with code and staying active in the Linux kernel community. I also maintain the clock framework in the Linux kernel, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's fun.
It seems that you have a dream job.
Yeah, I have no complaints. I'm quite happy. I really like who I'm working with. Most of my team, they are folks that I worked with previously at Texas Instruments, and I have a great relationship with them. So yes, I'm a lucky guy.
Okay, great. You have given the talk on this conference. So can you tell us what it was about?
Sure, I gave two talks. Yesterday I gave a discussion on Linux subsystem guidelines, like how to write a Linux driver framework and sort of the good way and the bad ways to do that. And then this morning I gave a discussion about a very wide and broad intro of power management. So how power management works actually in the hardware and then how we control it in Linux.
I was at that talk, not at all of them because it was running around. It was great.
Oh,
by the way,
thank you.
Next time, please don't hesitate to ask more time. It seems that you can tell us more than fits in this tight slot.
Sure.
So, what do you think? What interesting things or important things has happened in Linux and in open source projects in the last year or two?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of interesting things are happening, but they're not surprises because it sometimes takes. We'll work on some big development in Linux, and it'll take years to finally be completed. So for years now I've been following the energy-aware scheduling stuff, which is an interesting topic initiated by ARM and Linaro, but as well runtime PM. I mean, I'm mostly a power management guy. I'm very interested in power management topics. So runtime PM has been around for some time, and we're starting to see more and more adoption of that in drivers, and more vendors coming along, SoC vendors coming along and actually using that code, which is nice. I would say that nothing really earth-shattering is that I can report, but I'm happy to see that, I think in general progress in Linux is going in the right direction. You see more and more adoption. You see a lot more vendors, both from the east and the west, that are getting involved in upstream developments. People who normally they would keep their code closed are now starting to contribute back to the community. They honor the GPL, fewer GPL violations. All of this stuff is, I think, just good positive developments, year after year after year.
And probably it's quite a subjective thing. What do you think will happen? What's cooking right now? What will get in a year or two?
That's a great question. I mean, so I mostly work on consumer electronics devices, products you can hold in your hand. And so I'm always thinking about that domain. For me, I think that what would be exciting is if we can have sort of Android products or other consumer electronics products that were developed a little bit more in the open. I think that we're starting to see that. We're starting to see product manufacturers who are demanding, more recent code from the system-on-chip vendors, the semiconductor manufacturers they work with. They want everything to be done upstream, and that's a really positive progress that I see. Also, I see in general more support for multimedia functions that I like a lot in the kernel. So maybe we'll have a lot more chips doing 4K and cool stuff like that, and we're starting to see rapid adoption of that type of stuff. More advanced computational photography. I mean, these are like cool geeky technologies, right? I mean, if you're interested in augmented reality and virtual reality, it's a great time to be alive. I mean, these things are being developed very rapidly and ending up in the Linux kernel. So yeah, I mean, in general, the whole space is exciting.
And as I have mentioned, the geek things. What interesting technical things, maybe devices or ideas or social impacts of them, whatever, things like that, have you mentioned last time, and what of that has touched you?
Well, I would say in terms of the whole market, I think that IoT is a big market, but and it's interesting. But actually, for me, augmented reality and virtual reality, I think, are very personally exciting. You know, like I want to be able to put on some goggles and sit at my desk and work in a virtual office. You know, I mean, it's sort of science fiction, and that's why it's interesting. We've been reading about virtual reality, augmented reality in sci-fi novels for years, and it took decades, and now it's finally here. And so for me, I think that stuff is really interesting, and I'm personally involved in that, personally kind of interested. So hopefully it won't. It'll be real this time, because I think in the 80s there was some virtual reality, which everyone said, oh, now's the time, and it disappeared. And then in the 90s there was some more, and then it disappeared. Hopefully now it's the real thing. So.
Probably this thing will come in through the back door as usual.
Yeah.
So not from that direction everybody expects it. But
that's a great point. I mean, I've seen a lot of startups that are doing virtual reality for the enterprise, which is interesting because virtual reality used to always be about video games or some sort of entertainment, and to think about using that in an enterprise setting is a fascinating idea. So I think you're right. I think there will be some backdoor sort of unforeseen market that really opens it up and makes it plausible.
We are at the conference now, so what is your opinion? Why the conference exists? Why they're important?
Oh, I mean, I think the single most important thing that a conference does is it gives people a chance to meet up face to face, right? If you're a developer and you submit patches to a maintainer on the list, you may submit patches for years and never really meet that person until you go to a conference. And I find that when that happens, everything changes. The maintainer realizes that you're a human being. You realize the maintainer who's rejecting your patches, he's not such a jerk. He's actually a human being as well. And it really makes all future interactions, technical interactions, much better. It's also, it kind of puts everything into perspective, right? You get a lot more exposure to ideas that maybe you were missing out on if you're a remote employee, or if you're coordinating with people in another company, you may not get all of the context, right? But at a conference, I mean, you just absorb so much information. So, I mean, conferences exist for a lot of reasons, but the one-on-one personal interaction is the best part for sure.
And what conferences do you recommend our listeners and viewers to attend if they can, or at least to see the materials of them?
Oh, sure. I mean, as far as seeing materials online, I would say that most of the Linux Foundation conferences, Linux Plumbers and Embedded Linux Conference and LinuxCon, things like that, they do a good job of recording it, and usually the microphone quality is okay. So those are great to go on YouTube and to find them. They're also good to attend in person. They can be a little expensive. As far as like I would say more traditional, smaller conferences, I've really enjoyed Linux Peter. This has been a great experience. A similar conference is Kernel Recipes, which is in Paris. And this is one of the last free conferences. You have to sign up because they have a limited number of seats, but it's actually free to attend. And it's very small, very intimate. Those types of conferences. Also, I think that not just conferences, but even meetups, local meetups where you have Linux user groups and people that are really, really passionate. Those are very high value as well. I recommend people, go online and try to find all the local hackers around them and get together and have some beers. I mean, it's a wonderful experience.
So, guys from the SPB log, you hear that? You have praised it. And the usual personal question: what operating system is on your home computer?
Oh yeah, well, I'm glad I have multiple home computers to answer this question. So I admit that I'm using Mac OS on my laptop, right? And I mean, frankly, I think that most of the Linux desktop solutions are pretty bad, so that's why I use Mac OS. But of course, for all of my headless boxes, I have a big workstation that I do all my kernel compiles and all of my development on. That's running Debian. In fact, I think Debian's my number one choice for a Linux distribution for all the various machines, my network attached storage device, all of the machines I have in my house, they're all running Debian.
So it's Debian.
Debian.
So no any derivative, just the basic one.
Regular old Debian. Yeah.
So, thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.